She thought she was just buying an abandoned airfield to escape her old life, until she found a hidden bunker sealed beneath the runway. Inside were blueprints, flight logs, and a buried military secret tied to her own family name. What started as a fresh start turned into the discovery of a lifetime. This is the incredible story of how a woman uncovered a hidden bunker inside an abandoned airfield, and what she found inside still defies explanation. Please support us by subscribing to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's get started. Rosalie Maddox had never meant to disappear, only to begin again. The airfield wasn't much, just a cracked stretch of forgotten concrete tucked along the wide, empty edges of Montana's flatlands, where the wind never seemed to rest and the sky felt too big for a single life to matter. Rosalie stood near the rusted chain-link fence. Fingers wrapped around the key the realtor had handed her earlier that afternoon. It still felt warm in her palm, as if it belonged to someone braver than she was. 22 acres of silence, 5 buildings on their last legs, and more space than she knew what to do with. Space to breathe, space to break, space to start over. People whispered that she was running away, that she'd lost too much too fast. Maybe they were right. Her old mechanic shop in Wichita had folded without ceremony. The house her mother left behind had gone next, with nothing left worth clinging to. Rosalie took what little remained, bought this abandoned government airstrip from an auction, and drove north until the world stopped asking questions. The hangar was the first place she touched cold steel bones, fractured floors, dust thick as memory. But beneath all that ruin, she saw something else possibility. The 12th morning began like all the others. Rosalie boiled coffee on a camp stove, its flame flickering against the cold breeze seeping through broken windows. She sipped it slowly from a dented enamel mug, boots crunching over gravel as she walked the perimeter out of habit, or maybe hope. The air had a sharpness to it that day, like something was waiting to be noticed. Behind the farthest hangar, tucked beneath a leaning stack of rusted oil drums, she saw it. At first, it looked like nothing, just a dented piece of metal sunken into the dirt, half swallowed by weeds and moss. She moved the barrels aside with effort, brushing away decades of dust and grime with a crowbar. Her breath caught. It wasn't just metal. Bolts, reinforced steel edges, a thick, cold handle inset into a solid panel that looked more like a vault door than anything built for the surface. Faint letters barely visible until the light hit them just right, curved across the top. C7. Her heart thudded in her ears. Something about it didn't feel old. It felt buried. Rosalie crouched, fingers tracing the rim. The metal was freezing, despite the morning sun, like it had been untouched by time. No listing in the property deed mentioned anything underground. No survey flagged it. This door, this hatch, wasn't supposed to exist. She stood slowly, the wind tugging at her jacket, as if urging her back. But her eyes stayed locked on the steel panel, now breathing with meaning it hadn't had minutes earlier. That night, she barely slept. Every creak of the roof, every groan of the hangar beams in the wind, kept her alert. But it wasn't fear, it was obsession. The kind that scratches at the inside of your thoughts until there's nothing else. By sunrise, she had her old tools laid out beside the hatch. A headlamp, a grinder she hadn't used since her shop closed, a heavy pry bar, gloves, goggles. The bolts were industrial. Some had been welded over, seams sealed shut like someone wanted it locked forever. It took hours to cut through. Sparks lit the overgrown weeds around her. Her arms ached. Dust mixed with sweat on her cheeks. She was past the point of caution. This was commitment now. Somewhere between exhaustion and defiance. The final weld snapped with a sound that seemed to echo down through the concrete. She tested the handle. It groaned, stiff, but not locked. She hesitated. Then, like everything else in her life, she pushed forward alone. The hatch opened slowly. Rusted hinges screamed in protest. Cool air surged up, dry and sharp like something sealed long ago. A narrow staircase spiraled into darkness below. Rosalie stared down, her breath shallow. Part of her brain screamed for backup, for common sense, for some official to call. But she knew better. If she didn't go down, no one else would. She flicked on her headlamp and descended. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that waits. The kind that presses on your ribs and asks if you belong. Dust hung in the air like ash. Her boots left clear prints on the concrete steps, undisturbed for what looked like decades. The hallway below was built of thick, reinforced walls, rebar visible in cracked seams, military grade. And then she saw it. A second door, steel again. But this one had a keypad beside it, dead and unpowered. And on the wall, carved not painted, were words that sent chills through her. Maddox authorized personnel only. She staggered back. That was her name, her father's name, her grandfather's. It didn't make sense. This wasn't just a relic from the past. It was hers. She reached out, fingers brushing the etched letters. They felt deliberate, clean, like someone had carved them knowing she'd come. She stared until her head hurt. "This was built for you," a voice whispered inside her. "Or because of you." The silence deepened. Something vibrated faintly beneath her boots. A hum, just low enough to question if it was real. She stepped back, heart pounding. Turned down the hallway and found the open door. Inside, it looked like a control room. Dust-covered desks faced rusting monitors. Wires hung like vines. Filing cabinets had spilled their contents long ago. Binders, schematics, test logs scattered across the floor. One binder caught her eye, its spine cracked, its cover faded. "Test flight logs, I see. Series." Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. She flipped through. The handwriting was technical, neat, unmistakably military, dated from 1969 to 1975. Every entry listed test conditions, flight duration, and one strange acronym VI, TRU, L. Functionality. Vertical takeoff and landing in the 70s. Then she saw it. A schematic tucked inside, folded with care. A blueprint of something unlike any plane she'd ever seen. No wings. Sleek. The engine was compact. Alien, almost. Beneath the blueprint was a signature in the corner. Maddox. Her throat tightened. Her grandfather. She remembered his hands calloused and stained with oil. How he used to fix radios without manuals. How he stopped talking about his time in the service after her father was born. Rosalie sat on the bunker floor, surrounded by a legacy she'd never been told, in a room that had clearly waited for someone with her name to return. Dust settled around her, but in her chest, something stirred. This wasn't just about an abandoned airfield. It was about a secret someone tried to bury with blood and silence, and it had waited decades for Rosalie Maddox to find it. The binder wouldn't leave her thoughts. That night, long after the wind died, and the hangar returned to stillness, Rosalie sat on the plywood loft she called a bed, the test logs resting beside her lantern. She hadn't turned on the generator in 2 days somehow. Silence had become easier to sit with than the low hum of artificial life. But even in the quiet, her mind buzzed. She couldn't stop picturing the blueprint, the curves of the aircraft, the handwriting that mirrored her grandfather's old letters, back when he used to send birthday cards with little diagrams scribbled in the margins. She remembered thinking they were doodles. Maybe they weren't. She slept fitfully, if it could be called sleep at all. By morning, there was only one thing she knew with certainty. She hadn't seen everything. She needed to go back. The bunker felt colder this time. The air wrapped tighter around her skin, like the walls recognized her now, but weren't sure if they should trust her. She moved faster through the corridor, past the carved name, past the door with the dead keypad, into the control room where dust still floated like memory. That's when she saw it. A blinking light. Soft, green, steady. The terminal was alive. Rosalie's breath caught. She hadn't touched anything the day before. There was no power line, no generator, nothing that should be working after decades of abandonment. But there it was, glowing in the dark, like it had been waiting for her. She approached slowly. The screen was old, curved and coated in grime, but one word pulsed gently beneath layers of flickering code. Welcome, Maddox. She stared, frozen. Her hands tingled. Then came the prompt, Archive Integrity, 61% Reconstruct Interface YAN. Without thinking, she whispered, Yes. The screen blinked. Code spilled upward like rain falling in reverse. A low hum vibrated through the floor. Then silence. She leaned in, heart thudding, when a noise cut through the stillness. Footsteps. Not echoes from below, not the creak of old beams. These were heavy, deliberate steps above ground. Boots on gravel. She turned off her headlamp, heart in her throat, and held her breath. 3 knocks. Sharp, measured, against the hangar door. Rosalie moved fast, climbing the stairs from the bunker in a blur, her limbs aching but focused. She pressed against the hangar wall, peering around the rusted edge. There was a man standing by her truck. Older, late 60s, maybe. Tall, lean. Canvas jacket faded by sun, shortwave radio slung over one shoulder. His silver hair was buzzed close, and his stance was military-controlled. Watchful. He wasn't lost. He was looking for her. When his eyes found hers, they didn't widen in surprise. He simply nodded, like this was the meeting he'd expected all along. You're Maddox, he asked. Rosalie considered lying, but her voice betrayed her. Yeah. He didn't smile. I was told you'd find this place, he said. Voice steady. Didn't think it'd be this soon. She took a half step back. Who are you? He adjusted the strap on his radio. Name's Silas Boone. I worked with your grandfather. She blinked. That's not possible. He died when I was 9. Silas nodded slowly. I know. I buried him. The words struck like metal on stone, sharp. Final. Impossible to mishear. She stared at him, breath shallow. Silas's eyes moved past her, toward the hangar, toward the invisible line where secrets became real. You opened the hatch, didn't you? Rosalie didn't answer. You saw what's down there, he continued. That place wasn't supposed to be opened again. Not after what happened. He paused, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression. Fear! Project Icarus, he said, almost whispering. It didn't fail. He looked her straight in the eye. It worked. The world tilted beneath her. She leaned against the truck, suddenly cold. I don't understand. Silas didn't move closer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small metal flash drive, battered, scratched, old. "This belonged to your grandfather," he said. "You would have found it eventually, but you'll need it after you find the binder." She frowned. "I already found the binder." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Red vinyl." She nodded. He let out a long breath. "Then you're deeper in than I thought." He handed her the flash drive. It felt unnaturally heavy. "What's in the binder?" she asked. Silas stared at the gravel. "Truth, pieces of it. Anyway, the rest is in the IC archive room." She opened her mouth to ask another question, but he was already walking away back toward the weeds, toward the silence. That night. Rosalie sat on the hangar floor with the flash drive in one hand and her grandfather's old wrench in the other. Two ghosts, one made of data, one of steel. She didn't plug it in. Something told her to wait. First, she needed the paper, the weight, the smell of ink and dust. She needed the past in her hands before the ghosts in the machine spoke. By morning, she was back in the bunker, deeper than before, past locked rooms with blinking lights and rusted bolts. She followed the path her instincts laid before her, turning corners she hadn't turned yesterday, until she saw it. A metal door, hinges warped, slightly ajar. Faded letters read IC Archive 17C. Inside, the air dropped 10 degrees, a dry cold that wrapped around her lungs. Broken glass, fallen cabinets, and in the back corner, half buried beneath a filthy tarp, the red binder, vinyl, thick enough to choke on, black tabs down the side, stamped in bold white. Project Icarus, do not duplicate. She opened it with trembling hands. Not just technical notes, not just schematics. A diary written in equations, a map written in fire, and page by page, Rosalie Maddox began to understand. This wasn't just a craft. It was a doorway, and someone or something on the other side had already been watching. The binder didn't just tell a story, it changed her. Each page Rosalie turned felt like touching someone else's thoughts, thoughts too vast for their time, too bold for anyone to believe without seeing. Her grandfather's handwriting filled the margins with numbers, diagrams, fragments of half-completed ideas. But tucked between the data were things no blueprint should ever hold. Phrases like, "Time bends, not breaks," and scrawled more than once if they knew what it touched. They'd bury it in concrete and salt. She wasn't sure how long she sat on the floor of the IC archive room, hunched over the red binder. Hours blurred. Dust clung to her jeans, her hair, her fingertips. The air in the bunker no longer felt lifeless. It felt aware, like it had been stirred from slumber. There were mentions of something called the reactive compression core, a propulsion system with no combustion, powered by magnetic fields and a component labeled simply ALS-17. She didn't understand all the science, but the implications crawled under her skin. No heat, no fuel, no sound, just force and something else. A photo stopped her cold. Old, grainy, black and white. A triangular craft hovered 2 feet off the ground, no landing gear, no rotors. Beneath it, the air shimmered like light bending through water. In the bottom corner, handwritten in ink nearly faded away, Test 7 reached Stratosphere Foreman, no tail signature. Her breath caught. The next page was worse. A list of test pilots. 6 names. 5 with medical evaluations and flight durations. One name stood out, AR. Albright, Test 7, duration unknown, recovery partial. There was no further detail, no closure, just that one word, partial. Rosalie turned another page. Taped to it was a transcript from an audio log, a black box recording. Maybe. Static at first. Then a voice. Male. Young, uncertain. Altitude holding. No visual markers. Feels like I'm inside fog, but it's dry. Not air. Feels like memory. Like breathing someone else's dream. She flipped the page. Another voice responded, not through radio static. Not human. It said, "We remember you, Maddox." She dropped the binder. The words pulsed in her skull. "We remember you." Something still down there, something watching. And it knew her name. Later that evening, while cleaning out an old side room in the bunker, she found it a sealed film reel, tucked inside a tin case labeled IC5. She hesitated only a moment before threading it into the ancient projector in the control room. The machine groaned like it hadn't moved in decades. The room flickered, then the footage rolled. What she saw stole the breath from her lungs. The craft, it wasn't just hovering. It blinked in and out of existence. Gone. Back. Gone again. And each time it returned, something had changed. Slightly altered structure, panels reformed. It looked like it had aged, evolved. Then, in the final seconds, just before the reel burned out, her grandfather walked into the frame. William Maddox. Exactly as she remembered from old photos, except he was unchanged. Unaged, unmoved by time. He turned and looked directly into the camera. And he smiled. Not kindly, not coldly. Knowingly. Like he saw through the lens and into her. The projector clicked off. Rosalie sat in the dark, shaking. The kind of shake that doesn't come from fear, but from truth. Too big to hold. He had known she'd come. The next morning, Silas was waiting again. She didn't ask how he got in. She simply handed him the binder, flipped to the final photo of her grandfather's smile. He stared at it for a long time, then murmured, "So, he left it behind." Rosalie's voice cracked. "What is this, a time machine, a weapon? What did he build?" Silas sat on the edge of a workbench, his shoulders sinking with a kind of tired only secrets can cause. It started as propulsion research. He said, "Clean energy, faster flight, a new way to break atmospheric limits." Your grandfather pitched it as the next step in aerospace evolution. He paused. But when the first prototype came back, he shook his head. It came back changed. Changed how she asked quietly. The craft had metal fatigue that didn't match the flight path. Its bolts had markings, microscopic inscriptions in a language we hadn't even discovered yet. One pilot came back with an extra tooth, another forgot everything after enlistment. And Albright? He swallowed. He spoke in poetry for 3 days straight, then went completely silent. Rosalie gripped the edge of the table. "Why didn't you destroy it?" Silas looked at her like she'd asked the wrong question. "Because it didn't feel evil," he whispered. "It felt like a message, one we weren't ready for." She turned her face away. Tears burned in her eyes but didn't fall. "You buried it anyway." "We had to," he snapped, then softened. "The higher-ups wanted to weaponize its stealth tech, time jumps, who knows what else. But your grandfather?" He met her gaze. He thought it was alive. Or at least connected to something that is... Rosalie couldn't speak. Her hands clenched at her sides. Then Silas pulled something from his coat pocket, a sealed envelope. Yellowed with age. "He gave me this. He said, told me to deliver it to whoever found the site next. I never wanted that day to come." She opened the letter with trembling fingers. Inside, in her grandfather's handwriting. "To the one with my blood and my mind. If you found this, the door has opened again, but don't let them fly it. Not until you feel it. Icarus doesn't belong to the sky. It belongs to what waits beyond it. Please, if you love this world, close the hatch." Rosalie didn't move. Didn't breathe. She read it again, and again. Then she looked across the room at the schematics, at the components she had started assembling without even realizing it. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was connected. To legacy, to risk, to something older than science and bigger than fear. And somewhere beneath her feet, the bunker hummed again, soft and steady, like it, too, was waiting for her to decide. The bunker didn't sleep. Even when she did, Rosalie could feel it like a quiet heartbeat in the walls, pulsing low and steady beneath the concrete. It wasn't threatening. It didn't whisper anything sinister. It just existed. Constant. Present. Like a tide that never stopped turning. For the next 3 days, she barely left the underground. The binder, the flash drive, the notes, the components, it all became her world. A world where physics bent slightly sideways, where her grandfather's diagrams turned into instructions her hands somehow already understood. Her nights blurred into mornings. Coffee turned cold beside blueprints, and she started forgetting which days were which. The craft, or what remained of it, was buried in crates and containers she hadn't touched since the first week. Most were rusted shut, but a crowbar and stubbornness fixed that. Inside were pieces that didn't belong to any known machine. Cylindrical tubes with spiral carvings, translucent panels that shimmered like liquid mercury, coils wrapped in a fiber that felt like both metal and silk. She laid them out in the main hangar, carefully, like sacred relics. And then her hands moved. She didn't think. She remembered, but not from memory. From somewhere deeper. Late one night, using the last working multimeter from her old shop, Rosalie ran a voltage test across one of the smaller coils. She expected nothing. What she got was a surge. Not from the battery. From within. The coil pulsed with a sharp, rising tone like a tuning fork inside her teeth. The lantern flickered. Her tools rattled on the bench. Then, just as fast, it stopped. She backed away, heart racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't dormant. It wasn't dead tech. It was waiting to be woken up. At dawn, Silas returned. He stood in the hangar doorway, same as before, like a shadow that belonged to the building. "You opened the binder," he said. "Not a question." Rosalie didn't deny it. Her face said enough. He walked inside, eyes scanning the scattered components. His mouth tightened. "This tech," he muttered, "it doesn't belong in civilian hands." "I'm not a civilian," she snapped, sharper than she intended. "This was my grandfather's. My name's on that wall. My blood's in that bunker. I didn't steal this." Silas looked at her for a long, quiet second. Then he nodded. And they buried it because it worked too well. He stepped toward the table, picked up a thin panel that shimmered like water, held it between 2 fingers. "This isn't just propulsion," he whispered. "It's a field generator. It doesn't just move a craft." He looked up. "It erases it." Rosalie blinked. "From radar." He shook his head. "From everything. From cameras, satellites, maybe even from sight itself." She swallowed hard. "Then why bury it?" His eyes darkened. He set the panel down slowly. "Because the last time it flew, it didn't just disappear." He turned toward her, voice low, heavy with old grief. "It was gone for 12 minutes, and when it came back, the pilot wasn't the same." Rosalie's fingers curled around the edge of the table. "What do you mean?" He remembered things that hadn't happened yet. Silas said softly. People who didn't exist. Wars that hadn't been fought. He kept whispering about light that breathed. He met her eyes. "Your grandfather called it a miracle. I called it a mistake." She didn't reply. She couldn't. The air around her felt suddenly heavier. Not dangerous, but charged. like the moment before lightning touches the earth. That night, she didn't sleep. She walked the runway alone. Stars thick overhead, flashlight low to the ground. Gravel crunched beneath her boots, the wind catching her name and dragging it out like a question. She wasn't scared. She was called. Every instinct screamed that she shouldn't continue, that this was too big, too far, too unknown, that she should close the hatch, burn the binder, forget the name Icarus ever existed. But Rosalie Maddox didn't run from broken things. She rebuilt them. And this was more than just a machine. This was the legacy they tried to silence. By the fourth morning, she had cleared space in the hangar and assembled a raised platform from salvaged steel scaffolding. One by one, she began placing the pieces not by plan, but by feel, like following blueprints imprinted somewhere inside her bones. The frame of the craft began to take shape. It was lean, angular, elegant in a way most machines never are. The materials shimmered even in shadow. The structure hummed softly under her hands, like it recognized her. She didn't question it. She accepted it. Silas watched her work in silence. When she finally took a step back, sweat soaked through her shirt, dust streaking her face. He spoke. "You're close." She nodded. "Propulsion arrays intact. Core stabilizers are in. I found a backup battery system in one of the sub-vaults. If I run them in tandem, I might get a short ignition window." Silas looked pale. "You're really going to launch it?" "I have to know," she whispered. "Where it went. Why it came back different." He shook his head slowly. "You won't just find answers. Rosalie, you might not find yourself." She turned to him, voice barely above a breath. "That's a risk I live with every time I rebuild something broken." Silas said nothing for a long moment. Then he pulled a small folded slip of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "You'll need this." Rosalie unfolded it. A series of symbols, unfamiliar, geometric, ancient-looking, and yet she knew them. Her fingers tingled. Silas saw the recognition in her eyes. "They're not codes," he said. "They're sequences. Thought rhythms. Coordinates." "Maybe," to where she asked. He didn't answer, only stared at the craft, and whispered, wherever it went the first time, it didn't feel like building anymore. It felt like remembering. Rosalie Maddox moved through the hangar with a quiet, reverent precision, like she was putting together the pieces of someone she'd once known. Every panel she bolted, every wire she fused, felt familiar, like fingers retracing a melody they hadn't played in decades. But she'd never built anything like this before. No one had. At least, not anyone left above ground. She didn't eat much, barely slept. Her hands were raw and blistered, her shoulders stiff from hours bent over cold metal. But she kept going. The craft, Icarus, was nearly whole. And the more complete it became, the more she began to feel connected to it. It wasn't logical, she knew that, but it was true. One night, long after Silas had gone quiet in the corner, she stood alone before the nearly completed frame, her palms pressed against its cool surface. It thrummed beneath her touch, not mechanically, but rhythmically. Like a pulse, like breath. She closed her eyes, and something bloomed behind her ribcage. Not fear, not excitement. Recognition, as if the craft was waiting for her not just to finish it, but to understand it. And she did, not with her mind, but with something older, older than memory, older than even blood. That same night, she woke from a dream, if it could be called that. She was standing in the cockpit, but not on Earth. The sky outside wasn't black or blue or anything in between. It was shifting, breathing. She felt weightless, but grounded. Voices echoed in her ears, not speaking language, but emotion. A warmth settled in her spine, like a question she didn't know she had was finally answered. When she woke, she was crying, and not afraid. The next morning, she completed the core installation. The propulsion system locked into place with a sound that didn't echo through the hangar, but inside her chest. She stepped back. "I think it's ready." Silas watched her with eyes like old stone, weathered, waited. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just said, "Then it's time." He handed her a small black keycard. It was scuffed and worn, the kind of object that had passed through too many hands. "What's this?" she asked. "Failsafe, if something goes wrong." Rosalie stared at him. "Does that mean there's a chance I don't come back?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "There's always been that chance." The control panel inside the cockpit came to life the second she slid into the seat. No ignition key, no password, no start button. The craft recognized her. Lights blinked in sequence. Symbols danced across the screen, the same ones Silas had given her. She reached out, fingers hovering above the console. The ship hummed in reply. Her voice was barely audible. "Icarus, are you listening?" A faint flicker of light traced along the edge of the windshield, like a breath against glass. She input the sequence. One symbol at a time. The system pulsed. "Ready." Outside, tires crunched over gravel. She looked up. 3 black SUVs had pulled into the airfield. Men in tactical gear stepped out, precise, wordless. Their weapons weren't drawn, but they were ready. They moved toward the hangar like they had done this before. Silas moved to the entrance, blocking the way with his body. He raised both hands, not in surrender, in defiance. Inside, Rosalie didn't hesitate. She pressed enter. The floor trembled. Not violently, not explosively, but like the world itself had inhaled. The cockpit filled with light, first blue, then white hot. Panels lit up in waves. The sequence on screen began pulsing to the rhythm of her breath. Outside, agents shouted warnings. Silas didn't move. The wind exploded outward in a dome of pressure. Dust rose, weeds flattened. The agent stumbled back. The craft didn't shake, didn't roar. It rose, effortlessly, silently, like gravity had simply stepped aside. Rosalie's body vibrated in the seat. The walls around her blurred, not from speed, but from perception. The screens showed no altitude, no heading, just patterns, fractals of motion, echoes of sound, pulses of light that weren't visible to the naked eye. She looked out through the cockpit window. The sky was changing, colors she'd never seen, shades without names. Time slowed, then stopped, then shattered. She was nowhere, and everywhere. She was inside a dream that wasn't hers. She could feel someone else's breath in her lungs, hear thoughts that didn't come from her own mind. Memories flickered behind her eyes of stars being born, of oceans boiling beneath strange suns, of cities that never were and languages made of light. She saw herself as a child, then as a woman, then not as herself at all. She was part of something, a network, a memory that was alive. How long she drifted, she couldn't say. There was no time, only sensation, only awareness. And then, from that vast tapestry of light and feeling, something reached toward her, not to harm, not to claim, but to return. A voice. But not a voice. "We remember you, Maddox. You are the echo of the first leap. You do not fly. You unlock." Then the light fell inward, like a collapsing star, and she was pulled with it. The air became thick. The screens dimmed. The hum became heartbeat. She was falling, no descending. Returning, the craft hovered once again over the cracked tarmac of the airfield. Everything was silent, but the world had changed. The trucks were gone. The men gone! Even the sky looked softer, older. Rosalie brought the craft down gently. The landing was weightless. When she stepped out, the wind greeted her like a name it hadn't spoken in years. She stood in the middle of an empty world, the letter from her grandfather still warm in her back pocket, and realized she had not just flown a machine, she had flown into a memory of what could be. Rosalie Maddox stepped onto the tarmac like she'd never felt Earth before. The wind moved differently now, slower, softer, like it had been holding its breath and was finally allowed to exhale. Her boots landed in the same cracks, the same weeds, the same dust. And yet, nothing was the same. The air tasted faintly metallic, charged. The sky above her shimmered at the edges, not visibly, not like heat mirage, but like memory. The hangar was empty. No black SUVs, no agents, no Silas, only silence. She stood still for a moment, waiting for some part of her to scream in panic, waiting for fear, confusion, dread. But all she felt was clarity, the kind that only comes after breaking through something bigger than yourself and coming back whole. She didn't know how long she'd been gone. Time had unraveled inside that space between spaces spooled out like thread in zero gravity. Could have been minutes, could have been decades. The only thing that anchored her now was the feeling, the deep, unshakable certainty that she had crossed some threshold few ever dared approach, and returned with more than answers. She had returned with purpose. In the hangar, the craft sat quietly, its surface still pulsing with that faint, low resonance like a heartbeat in metal form. It no longer looked like a machine to her. It looked like a message. Every angle, every component, every impossible function, it was all intentional. Not designed just to fly. Designed to remember, to connect, to change. And somehow, her family had been at the center of it. All these years, she had believed she was running from failure, from a life that had slipped through her fingers. But now, she understood. She hadn't been running. She had been drawn. She found the letter again. Still folded in her back pocket. Still written in her grandfather's steady, stubborn hand. Icarus doesn't belong to the sky. It belongs to what waits beyond it. If you love this world, close the hatch. She held the paper in shaking hands. Read it one more time. Then looked up. The hatch was still open. Waiting, but not to be shut. Not yet. That night, she didn't sleep in the loft. She slept in the cockpit, curled in the pilot's seat, her head resting against the side panel, the hum of the core vibrating softly beneath her. She dreamed of voices that didn't speak, of stars that blinked like eyes, of gravity made of thought, of a world she hadn't discovered yet, but that somehow remembered her. In the days that followed, Rosalie stayed at the airfield, working in silence. Not hiding, not escaping. Preparing. She cataloged everything, every logbook, every part, every schematic. She rewired the old generator, set up a satellite link for data backup, and began digitizing the entire Icarus archive. She didn't intend to publish it. Not yet. Some truths weren't meant to be headlines. Some truths were meant to be protected. She walked the runway every morning now, not to search, not to patrol, but to listen. And sometimes when the sky was overcast and the wind still, she could feel something listening back. One afternoon, while organizing a crate of old maintenance records, she found a photograph pressed between the pages. It was her grandfather, younger than she remembered, standing beside the triangular craft. His face was turned towards someone outside the frame, his eyes soft. A rare moment of calm. On the back, written in pencil, not the end, the opening. She smiled through tears she didn't expect. Not sadness, not joy. Just release. The airstrip never made the news. No officials came knocking, no agents returned. Whatever had tried to contain Icarus, to bury it in silence and steel, had vanished with the event horizon Rosalie had crossed. Or maybe they were never real in the way she thought. Maybe they were just keepers of the line, and now she was the one who stood watch. Weeks passed, then months. The craft remained dormant, but never silent. She learned to hear its moods, its shifts. Sometimes it buzzed faintly when she entered the hangar. Sometimes it pulsed when she dreamed. It was waiting, but not for another flight. For understanding. And one day she knew what to do. She didn't suit up. She didn't pack a bag. She simply placed her hand on the console, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I'm ready, not to go, but to learn." The panel lit up. But this time there was no launch. Just light. Soft, all-encompassing, like being wrapped in a thought too vast to speak. She didn't disappear. She became a keeper of memory, a guide for whatever would come next. When people asked years later why she never reopened the airstrip, why she never went public with her discovery, why she lived quietly with nothing but old notebooks and a rusted hanger to her name, she'd only smile and say, "Some stories aren't ours to tell. Some are ours to protect. And some are still being written." And if they looked closely, they might see the shimmer in the sky behind her. Just for a second. Like the edge of a craft that knew how to listen. As dusk settled over the abandoned airfield, Rosalie Maddox didn't reach for the controls again. Instead, she opened her grandfather's notebook not to build another machine, but to begin documenting the questions no one else had dared to ask. Not for herself, but for whoever came next. Because this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to every mechanic who was told she wasn't an engineer, every girl who inherited more silence than answers, and every soul who ever stared at the unknown and felt drawn, not afraid. The woman who once walked away from everything had rebuilt not just a forgotten aircraft, but a place where possibility could live again. Because for Rosalie, and for those who will one day find that same hatch, the unknown isn't something to fear. It's where we begin. The end? Up next, 2 more powerful journeys waiting just beyond the horizon. Click to keep exploring with us, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe that some stories are worth unburying.